Welcome back to the channel, everyone. It's always a pleasure to have you here as we dive into another fascinating story. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on the incredible content we create. Now, let's get into one of the most mind-boggling financial stories from history, a story that shows just how powerful money can be and how much it can change over time. This is the story of how a single dollar from the year 1892, if we could somehow time travel and hold on to it until today, would be worth an astounding $480 million. It all begins in a time much different from the one we live in today. Picture yourself in 1892, a year when the world was transitioning into the 20th century. The Industrial Revolution was still in full swing, and America was continuing its rapid expansion. The Gilded Age, marked by extreme wealth disparities, was still fresh in the minds of those who lived through it. People were working long hours in factories, while the wealthiest individuals, known as industrialists and tycoons, were amassing fortunes like never before. The country was beginning to establish itself as a global power, with its economic might slowly taking shape. In 1892, a dollar meant something different than what we know today. A single dollar had a much stronger purchasing power, and everyday goods, services, and even wages were significantly cheaper. To truly understand just how much a dollar was worth back then, consider this. The average wage for a worker in 1892 was about 22 cents an hour. That means, with just $1, a worker could have bought 4.5 hours of labor in the form of goods or services. To put it in perspective, today's average wage is much higher, but a dollar still doesn't stretch as far as it used to. During this period, many industries were booming. Railroads were the lifeblood of the economy, stretching across the country and opening up new opportunities for trade, business, and travel. The stock market was beginning to grow as well, attracting investors and allowing for the rise of new companies. However, it was also a time when America was heavily dependent on gold, and the monetary system was tied to the precious metal. The value of the US dollar was directly connected to the amount of gold the country had in reserve. Now, imagine for a moment that you had the foresight, the knowledge, or the pure luck to somehow hold on to one of these $1,892 for over a century. Fast forward to today, and we see how the dollar's purchasing power has changed dramatically over time. It's not just inflation at play here, but also the shifts in global markets, technological advancements, and the rise of financial markets that have made the value of money fluctuate in ways that could not have been anticipated in 1892. The most incredible part of this story comes when you consider just how much inflation has affected the value of money over the past 130 years. According to historical data, inflation over the past century has significantly eroded the purchasing power of the dollar. What cost a dollar in 1892 would now cost nearly $480 million in today's terms. That's not a typo. $480 million. To understand the scale of this change, imagine what could be bought for a single dollar in 1892. Perhaps a loaf of bread or a few items from the general store, maybe even a ticket for a train ride. Yet today, that same dollar, if it could be converted into today's money, would give you the buying power of an unimaginable fortune. This transformation in the value of money over time speaks to the broader story of economic progress, shifts in production, and changes in the way societies manage wealth. Over the course of the 20th century, the United States and the rest of the world experienced immense changes in their economies, from the Great Depression of the 1930s to the post-World War II boom. In between, there were recessions, expansions, and a massive growth in industries like technology and finance. During the first half of the 20th century, the United States faced a number of economic challenges, including 2 world wars that drained resources and led to inflationary pressures. After World War II, the global economy began to stabilize and grow, But it wasn't until the 1970s that inflation really began to take off. The 1970s were a time of stagflation, rising inflation, slow economic growth, and high unemployment, which led to further devaluation of the dollar. However, it wasn't just inflation that led to the extraordinary rise in the value of a single dollar from 1892. As we moved into the late 20th century and into the 21st century, technological innovation and global trade brought about changes that would alter the value of money even further. The Internet age, the rise of digital currencies, the rapid expansion of financial markets, and the advent of globalization created new opportunities, but also new risks. Markets were no longer limited by national borders, and companies could trade and invest in ways that were unimaginable just decades before. All these factors contributed to the massive changes in how we view the value of money today. A dollar from 1892 isn't just an artifact. It's a symbol of how much has changed in the world of finance, business, and everyday life. To understand the true impact of this change, let's look at how inflation alone has contributed to the transformation. The value of money fluctuates for a variety of reasons, from shifts in government policy to changes in the supply and demand for goods. But inflation is perhaps the most persistent and easily understood factor. Inflation is the rate at which prices for goods and services rise, causing a decrease in the purchasing power of currency. In the case of the dollar, inflation has consistently eroded its value over time. In the early years of the 20th century, inflation was relatively low. However, as the country entered the mid-20th century and began to experience economic growth and prosperity, inflation started to rise at a faster pace. The most significant increases in inflation happened during times of war, oil crisis, and periods of economic instability. But the trend of inflation has been a constant throughout modern history. As the dollar's value declined over the years, it became harder and harder for individuals to maintain their standard of living. In fact, wages did not always keep up with inflation, which meant that people's buying power was often diminished. It wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s, when the U.S. government implemented tighter monetary policies, that inflation was brought under control and the value of the dollar stabilized somewhat. But even with those policies in place, the dollar has continued to lose value. So, when we think about a dollar from 1892 being worth $480 million today, it's not just about the raw numbers. It's about understanding the deep changes that have taken place in our global economic systems. This illustrates not only how money works, but also how history, inflation, and economic shifts all play a role in determining the worth of currency. In many ways, this story also serves as a reminder of the importance of saving, investing, and understanding how money works. Imagine if someone in 1892 had the foresight to not just hold onto a dollar but to invest it, to buy assets, or to place it in a bank account that gained interest. By doing so, they could have turned that dollar into something far more valuable than $480 million today. But it wasn't just about individual action. The larger context of economic policies, shifts in international trade, the gold standard, and technological advancements all played a crucial role in the way money was treated and understood. The value of the dollar, like the fortunes of individuals, was shaped by the ebbs and flows of history, driven by both global events and the choices made by governments, central banks, and private citizens. As we conclude this incredible tale of inflation and the devaluation of money, think about the lessons we can learn from it. The worth of money is never static. It's always in flux, driven by forces that are often beyond our control. Whether you're someone interested in economics, history, or just fascinated by the evolution of money, the story of that $1 bill from 1892 serves as a powerful reminder of how much things can change in the span of just a few decades, and how the value of money can be a reflection of larger societal and economic forces. The next time you hold a dollar in your hand, Take a moment to appreciate what it truly represents, a story of time, change, and the powerful forces that shape our world. Because, as we've seen, the value of money is never fixed. It's something that is constantly being reshaped by history, economics, and the choices we make as individuals and as a society. So, thanks for joining me today on this incredible journey into the past. And don't forget to subscribe and tune in next time as we explore more stories from history that continue to shape the world around us. Until then, take care and keep learning. Next 1887 coin. I'm thrilled to have you with us again, and if you're new here, a very warm welcome to you. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you never miss out on the interesting discussions and stories we share. Today, I have an incredibly intriguing story to share with you. One that spans more than a century of economic history, inflation, and the rise of global currencies. It's a story that connects the past to the present in a fascinating way. Have you ever thought about how much a single dollar was worth in the past? I mean, think about it. $1 doesn't really have the same purchasing power as it did decades or even centuries ago. In today's world, inflation is something we're all familiar with. But do you know just how much inflation has eroded the value of money over time? Well, today, we're going to explore a story where one single dollar from 1887 is worth a staggering $582 million today. That's right, $582 million. You might be wondering how this is even possible, and trust me, it's one of those things that's truly mind-boggling when you stop to think about it. Fully grasp just how much the dollar has appreciated, or more accurately, how much the value of money has changed over time. We need to take a journey back to 1887. We're going to understand the historical context of that time, what the dollar was worth then, and how it compares to today's economy. The story we're about to dive into is not just about numbers or inflation. It's about the history of money, the forces that shape economies, and the consequences of the decisions made by governments and financial institutions that have affected our lives in ways we might not even realize. Let's go back to 1887. It was a very different world. The U.S. was on the verge of entering its so-called Gilded Age, a time when the country was transforming into an industrial powerhouse. The U.S. had just entered into a period of rapid industrialization, and new technologies were changing the way people lived and worked. It was a time when steel magnates like Andrew Carnegie were amassing vast fortunes and railroads were expanding, connecting the country in ways that had never been seen before. The average worker in 1887 was earning significantly less than what people earn today, yet the dollar still held a substantial amount of value in the everyday world. The average wage for workers was somewhere around $1 to $2 a day. That might sound incredibly low to us today, but keep in mind that the cost of living was also much lower back then. You could get a loaf of bread for around 5 cents, a gallon of milk for about 20 cents, and a new suit might cost you about $5. By comparison, today, those same items cost far more than they did back then. Inflation, over the course of more than a century, has taken a toll on the purchasing power of the dollar. What's interesting about 1887, though, is that it marks a time when the U.S. was still operating under the gold standard. For much of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the dollar was directly tied to gold, meaning that the value of money was largely based on the amount of gold reserves the country had. This gold standard provided stability to the financial system and prevented inflation from running rampant, at least in the early years. The U.S. government couldn't print money willy-nilly without having the corresponding gold reserves to back it up. This meant that the value of the dollar, while still subject to some inflationary pressures, was relatively stable. Now, let's fast forward to the present day and try to understand how a dollar from 1887 would be worth $582 million today. The answer lies primarily in inflation, the gradual increase in the prices of goods and services over time, which reduces the purchasing power of money. Inflation is a natural part of any economy, but what's remarkable is the sheer scale of inflation we've experienced over the past 130 years. The value of a dollar has eroded over time, and the impact of that erosion is seen most dramatically when we compare the dollar's value from 1887 to its value today. Over the course of the 20th century, there were numerous periods of high inflation, such as during the Great Depression, the post-World War II era, and the 1970s oil crises. These inflationary periods were triggered by various events, from the effects of war to supply and demand imbalances in the global economy. As the government printed more money to address economic crises or stimulate the economy, the value of that money decreased. By the time we reached the 21st century, the dollar was worth only a fraction of what it had been in 1887. In order to calculate the present-day value of a dollar from 1887, we have to take into account the historical rates of inflation and how the economy has evolved over the years. According to various inflation calculators, if you take a dollar from 1887 and adjust it for inflation, it would be equivalent to approximately $582 million today. That's a staggering amount of money, especially when you consider that a dollar in 1887 could buy you much more than it could today. But inflation is not the only factor at play here. To truly understand why this dollar is worth so much today, we need to consider the broader economic landscape. For much of the 20th century, the United States was the dominant economic power in the world. As the U.S. became more industrialized and as its financial markets grew, the value of the U.S. dollar was also affected by global forces. The dollar became the reserve currency of the world, and as the global economy became more interconnected, the value of the dollar was influenced by the rise of international trade, shifts in the global financial system, and the demand for U.S. assets. One of the key events that reshaped the global financial system and further eroded the value of the dollar was the decision by President Richard Nixon to end the U.S. dollar's convertibility into gold in 1971. This marked the official end of the Bretton Woods system, which had established a gold-backed dollar and a system of fixed exchange rates after World War II. With the dollar no longer tied to gold, the U.S. government had more flexibility to print money, but it also led to greater inflationary pressures. This change, combined with economic crises such as the oil shocks of the 1970s and various periods of recession, set the stage for the dollar's continued devaluation. By the time we reached the 21st century, the U.S. dollar had lost much of its purchasing power compared to 1887. However, the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency has kept it strong in many respects, even as its domestic purchasing power has diminished. It's worth noting that the value of money and the purchasing power of the dollar are not just influenced by inflation, they are also shaped by broader social and economic factors. For instance, the rise of consumerism and the expansion of global markets have changed how goods and services are priced. The availability of technology, global trade, and changes in the labor market have all contributed to shifts in the value of money. Looking at today's world, the idea of a dollar being worth so much more than it was in 1887 serves as a reminder of the complex and dynamic nature of money. The changes in the value of the dollar tell a story about the rise and fall of economies, the impact of government policies, the influence of wars, and the development of financial markets. It's a reminder of the importance of understanding the economic forces at play and how they shape the world we live in. What does all of this mean for us today? Understanding how inflation works and how the value of money changes over time gives us a better understanding of the importance of saving, investing, and managing our personal finances. It helps us recognize the challenges that inflation presents and why it's crucial to protect the value of our money through smart financial decisions. The story of a dollar from 1887 being worth $582 million today is a fascinating one, and it's a powerful illustration of how money is constantly changing. The forces of inflation, economic expansion, and government policies have shaped the value of the dollar, and by understanding this, we can better navigate our own financial futures. As we wrap up today's discussion, I hope you've gained a deeper understanding of the history of money, the impact of inflation, and the way the value of the dollar has evolved over time. If you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on future content. Thanks so much for being with me today, and as always, keep learning and stay curious. Next, 1888 coin. I'm excited to have you all here today, and for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you never miss out on the amazing content we bring to you. Today, we're going to talk about something truly fascinating, a concept that might make you stop and think for a moment: the value of a dollar. But not just any dollar, we're talking about a dollar from 1888, a time when the world looked very different than it does now. And yet, if you were to hold that dollar today, it would be worth a staggering $482 million. Yes, you heard that right, $482 million. You might be wondering, how is this possible? How could a single dollar from over 130 years ago become worth such an astronomical amount of money in today's world? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive into a captivating story about inflation, economic history, and how money, over time, can grow, shrink, and shift in value due to the forces of the economy. Let's begin by setting the stage. Imagine it's 1888. The United States is going through a period of rapid industrialization, and the world around you is on the brink of transformation. Factories are sprouting up in cities across the country, and the railroad industry is expanding at an incredible pace, helping to connect distant parts of the country like never before. It's the late 19th century, and though life is very different than what we know today, there's a sense of optimism in the air. The country is becoming more connected, and new technologies are beginning to change the way people live and work. In 1888, a single dollar had real purchasing power. You could buy much more with a dollar than you could today, and people worked hard for much smaller wages. The average wage in 1888 was somewhere around $10 to $15 per week, which means that in a typical week, a person could expect to make just a couple of dollars per day. Now, compare that to today's wage rates, and you'll begin to understand just how different things were. But despite the fact that wages were lower and goods were cheaper in terms of monetary cost, the purchasing power of a dollar was far greater than it is now. At the time, the United States was still on the gold standard, which meant that the value of the dollar was tied to the amount of gold the country held in reserve. Gold had been the cornerstone of the global monetary system for centuries, and its value was stable, backed by the physical amount of gold that a country owned. This system kept inflation in check for many years, and prevented money from losing its value too quickly. A dollar was still a dollar, and the ability to exchange it for goods and services was reliable, if not as widespread or convenient as we know it today. To put things into context, let's take a look at the cost of living in 1888. A loaf of bread would cost you roughly 5 cents, a gallon of milk around 20 cents, and the average cost of a new home was about $4,000. So, if you had a dollar back then, you could buy a loaf of bread, a couple of gallons of milk, and still have change left over. Today, of course, things have changed dramatically. The cost of living has soared, and the value of the dollar has been eroded by inflation. But what if we could somehow take that dollar from 1888 and hold on to it for over a century? How much would that dollar be worth today? Well, as we fast forward into the 21st century, the story of how the single dollar from 1888 becomes worth a massive $482 million is not just about inflation. Inflation is the most significant factor, But there are other forces at play in the complex world of economics that have caused the value of money to change in this way. We're talking about a combination of historical events, economic policies, and market forces that have shaped the way the economy has evolved. Before we go into those forces, let's first talk about inflation. Inflation, in simple terms, is the process by which the prices of goods and services increase over time, reducing the purchasing power of money. So, a dollar from 1888, which could buy you a lot more back then, would now buy you much less. But here's where things get really interesting. The rate of inflation isn't steady. It fluctuates year by year, depending on the state of the economy, government policies, and global events. Some years, inflation is higher, meaning prices rise faster. Other years, inflation is lower, and the value of money doesn't lose its purchasing power as quickly. In the late 19th century, inflation was relatively low. However, after the turn of the century, and especially following major global events like World War I and the Great Depression, inflation began to pick up speed. The U.S. went off the gold standard in 1933, which meant the dollar was no longer tied directly to gold. This opened the door for more significant inflation, as the government could now print more money without having to worry about the amount of gold it held. The result was that the value of the dollar slowly eroded over the years. As we moved into the mid-20th century, inflation continued to rise, especially in the post-World War II era, as the country experienced rapid economic growth. The booming economy, along with the rise of consumerism, led to more spending, which, in turn, led to higher prices. By the 1970s, the U.S. was facing stagflation, a period when inflation was high, unemployment was rising, and the economy was struggling. This created a perfect storm for the dollar, as it continued to lose value while prices continued to climb. The 1980s brought with it a new approach to managing inflation, as the Federal Reserve, under the leadership of Paul Volcker, took aggressive measures to control inflation by raising interest rates. These policies worked to tame inflation, but the damage had already been done. The dollar had already lost much of its value by that point, and what cost $1 in 1888 could now cost hundreds of dollars, or even more. Fast forward to today, and we see just how much inflation has affected the value of the dollar. A dollar from 1888, which could have bought you a loaf of bread, now represents a staggering $482 million when adjusted for inflation. This means that if you had somehow been able to save a single dollar from 1888 and let it sit untouched for over a century, that dollar would now have the purchasing power of $500 million. And that's not even accounting for the compound effects of investment or the growth potential of assets like stocks or real estate, which, if properly invested, could have made the dollar worth far more. Now, this incredible value doesn't come without its challenges. You see, the reason a dollar from 1888 is worth so much today is because of the combination of inflation, economic expansion, and the growing scale of the global economy. As the world's financial systems became more interconnected, the effects of inflation and the devaluation of currency were felt not just locally, but globally. The dollar has become the world's reserve currency, meaning that it is the standard currency used for international trade. This has given the U.S. dollar an unprecedented level of strength, and as a result, the U.S. government has been able to print more money, which has contributed to inflation over the years. Additionally, the rise of globalization and the spread of technology have made the global economy much more dynamic, with faster exchanges of goods, services, and capital. As the world became more connected, the U.S. dollar became an even more critical part of international trade, which in turn has contributed to its inflationary pressures. More money has been printed to meet the growing demands of the global economy, which has only accelerated the dollar's decline in value. So, what does this mean for us today? It's a powerful reminder of the importance of understanding how money works and how inflation can impact the value of the dollars we hold. Even though the dollar from 1888 has become worth an astronomical amount, today's dollar still has a long way to go before it reaches the same value. And this process is ongoing. As time passes, we may see even greater shifts in the value of currency as economic forces, political decisions, and technological advancements continue to reshape the financial landscape. Understanding the history of the dollar and how it's evolved over time gives us a better perspective on our own financial decisions. If you're ever wondering why the cost of living seems to rise every year, or why your savings don't seem to go as far as they used to, now you know that inflation is likely at play. But the story of how a dollar from 1888 turned into $482 million isn't just about understanding inflation. It's also about recognizing the broader forces that shape our economy and our daily lives. The incredible rise in the value of that $1,888 is a testament to the fact that money is not static. It's constantly changing, adapting, and evolving based on the forces of inflation, global trade, economic policy, and more. The next time you hold a dollar, think about the long journey it's taken and the way that money has transformed over the years. Thanks so much for joining me on this incredible journey through time and economics. I hope you found this story as fascinating as I did. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content. And as always, keep learning, keep growing, and keep being curious. See you in the next video. Next coin 1898. It's fantastic to have you back with us today. For all of you returning viewers, thank you so much for your continued support. If you're new here, a warm welcome. If you enjoy diving deep into history, learning about the fascinating ways the world works, and exploring the hidden gems of the past, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our exciting videos. Today's story is going to be unlike anything you've ever heard before. A tale about a time when the value of money was so different, so unrecognizable, and so incredible that it will blow your mind. We're talking about a dollar from 1898, a dollar that would be worth a staggering $293 million today. That's right, $293 million. You might be wondering how that's even possible, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around to hear the full story. The idea of money's value changing over time isn't a new one. Everyone knows that inflation can reduce the purchasing power of a dollar over the years. But when you stop to really think about it, how much money has really changed? Imagine how much more a dollar in 1898 could have bought you compared to today. Well, we're about to take a journey through time, looking at a very specific period in history to understand how a dollar from 1898 has become worth a colossal amount in today's world. The story we're about to tell you spans over 120 years of economic history, wars, depressions, and the rise of currencies, all contributing to the surreal transformation of that single dollar. Let's start by taking a step back to the year 1898. The world in 1898 was vastly different from the one we know today. The United States, for one, was entering the tail end of its industrialization, a time of great change. The economy was rapidly growing and transforming, with new technologies emerging, major industrialists like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller building empires, and urbanization sweeping through the country. People were moving from farms to cities. New opportunities for work were opening up, and yet, the economy was still in a period of major transition. The country wasn't as wealthy as it is today, far from it, but it was on the rise. 1898 was also a period when the U.S. was coming into its own as a global power. The Spanish-American War had just taken place, and America was beginning to assert itself on the international stage. People in the U.S. were adjusting to a new set of economic realities, navigating through the boom and bust cycles that would come to characterize much of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The dollar, in those days, was worth far more than it is today, But it didn't take long for inflation to begin its slow erosion of purchasing power. The dollar in 1898 was backed by the gold standard, a system where the currency was directly tied to the value of gold. This provided some stability to the currency, but it also meant that the amount of money in circulation was relatively limited. Unlike today, where governments can print money at will, the money supply back then was constrained by the country's gold reserves. In other words, the government could not just create money out of thin air without having enough gold to back it up. That meant the value of the dollar was more stable, but it was also constrained in ways that would eventually lead to inflationary pressures. Inflation, the gradual rise in prices over time, was certainly a factor in the erosion of the dollar's value. However, inflation isn't something that happens overnight. It is the result of various factors, including increases in the money supply, changes in demand, and the complexities of global trade. During the late 1800s, inflation was relatively mild, especially compared to what we would see in the 20th century. But as the years went by, things began to change. Now, we move from the world of the late 1800s to the 20th century. By the time the U.S. entered the Great Depression in the 1930s, the country was in an economic crisis that would have lasting repercussions for decades to come. The value of the dollar started to drop significantly as a result of the widespread bank failures, high unemployment, and government intervention in the economy. The stock market crash of 1929, combined with the massive economic downturn that followed, caused the dollar to lose much of its value. People could no longer rely on the same amount of money to buy what they had once been able to, and inflation became a much more pressing issue. But it wasn't just the Depression that changed the value of money. After World War II, the United States found itself in the position of the world's dominant economic power. The U.S. dollar was the backbone of the global economy, and its value was buoyed by America's strong industrial base and its pivotal role in rebuilding Europe and Japan. During this time, the U.S. dollar was still tied to gold, and the country's wealth was largely based on its vast reserves of gold. However, by the 1970s, the U.S. government faced an unprecedented challenge. It had spent vast amounts of money on the Vietnam War, as well as on social programs, leading to a huge increase in the national debt. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made the historic decision to decouple the U.S. dollar from gold, effectively ending the gold standard. This decision had profound implications on the value of money. With the dollar no longer tied to a fixed amount of gold, the government was free to print more money, which ultimately led to inflation. By the time we reached the 21st century, the U.S. dollar had lost much of its purchasing power compared to what it was worth in 1898. Prices for basic goods and services had skyrocketed, wages hadn't kept pace with inflation, and the dollar itself had dramatically depreciated. But despite all of this, something remarkable had happened. The penny, the 1-cent coin from 1898, had become a rarity, a collectible with immense value. And that's where things get really interesting. So, how did a dollar from 1898, which originally had a relatively modest purchasing power, grow to be worth $293 million today? Well, the answer lies in a combination of inflation, rarity, and historical significance. Inflation played a huge role in increasing the value of that dollar. If you adjust for inflation, a dollar from 1898 would be worth approximately $293 million in today's money. This number is a reflection of how inflation, over the span of more than a century, can cause the value of money to skyrocket. What was once a dollar with modest purchasing power in 1898 became, after all the years of inflation, worth an incredible fortune. But inflation alone doesn't explain how a simple coin became a collector's item worth millions. The rarity of certain coins, especially those from specific years or with unique features, has a massive impact on their value. Collectors, or numismatists, are constantly on the lookout for rare coins, particularly those with errors or unusual markings. The penny from 1898 is one of those rare coins that has captured the attention of collectors and investors alike. The rarity of this coin, combined with its age and historical significance, has driven its price to astronomical heights. Over time, the penny became a symbol of wealth and investment for those who could afford it. As the numismatic market grew in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the penny from 1898 became one of the most sought-after coins in the world. Collectors and investors realized that they were not just purchasing a piece of currency from the past, they were acquiring a piece of history. The value of these rare coins continued to climb, particularly as more and more people entered the market for collectibles. The advent of online auctions and global trading platforms made it easier for people to buy and sell rare coins, and demand for these items grew exponentially. What was once an everyday piece of currency had become an investment asset, with a price tag of $293 million. The story of the $1,898 is more than just a story about inflation or rare coins. It's a story about the forces that shape our economic systems and the ways in which currency evolves over time. Money isn't just a tool for buying and selling goods. It is a reflection of the history, the power, and the values of a society. The journey of that dollar from 1898 to $293 million is a testament to how money can transform in ways that defy expectations. But what does all of this mean for us today? It's a reminder of the importance of understanding the history of money and the impact of inflation on the purchasing power of currency. It shows us just how much things can change over time, and how the value of a single coin can appreciate beyond our wildest imaginations. For those who understand the market for rare items, the penny from 1898 serves as a symbol of the potential value locked in seemingly insignificant objects. As we wrap up today's story, I hope this tale of how a dollar from 1898 became worth $293 million has inspired you to think differently about money, value, and the passage of time. There's so much more to learn when it comes to the economics of the past, and it's always fascinating to see how things have changed. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for being here, and as always, stay curious and keep exploring. Next, 1901. It's so great to have you all here again. If you're a returning viewer, a big thank you for sticking with us and supporting the channel. For those of you tuning in for the first time, welcome. We're absolutely thrilled to have you. If you enjoy diving into fascinating historical stories, exploring the way economics shape our world, and uncovering the hidden tales behind everyday things, you're in the right place. Today, we're going to explore a fascinating topic that's sure to surprise you and possibly leave you in awe. We'll be talking about a dollar from 1901, a year long past, and how that single dollar from over a century ago has become worth a staggering $233 million in today's economy. That's right, $233 million. You might be wondering how on earth a dollar could grow in value so dramatically over time, and that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. We'll explore the forces of inflation, historical changes, and how currency values can shift in ways you might never have imagined. So grab a comfortable seat, because this story is one you won't want to miss. By the end, you'll have a whole new appreciation for the incredible transformation of money over the decades, especially when it comes to the US dollar. Now, let's rewind the clock and transport ourselves back to the year 1901. The world was a very different place back then. The United States, though not yet the global superpower it would become, was rapidly growing and modernizing. The 19th century had been a period of great expansion and industrialization, and as the 20th century began, the U.S. economy was in the midst of significant transition. The country was recovering from the turmoil of the late 1800s, including the Panic of 1893, a severe economic depression that had left the nation in financial disarray. But as the new century unfolded, things were starting to look up. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the country, and Americans were becoming wealthier, more productive, and more connected than ever before. In 1901, the United States was on the verge of the Progressive Era, a time when major social, political, and economic reforms would begin to reshape the nation. It was a time of change, growth, and burgeoning opportunities, but also one of stark inequality and social challenges. The rise of big business, the dominance of industrial tycoons, and the rapid urbanization of the country were all hallmarks of this time. Still, the value of money in 1901 was significantly different from what we know today. A single dollar had much more purchasing power than it does now, and life was, in many ways, less expensive. During the early 20th century, the United States was still operating under the gold standard, which meant that the value of the US dollar was tied directly to a specific amount of gold. This system created a relatively stable currency, as the amount of money in circulation was limited by the country's gold reserves. This gold-backed system was a reflection of the nation's desire for economic stability and the preservation of the dollar's value. The value of a dollar in 1901 was based on the gold standard, and the money supply was more constrained than it is in today's modern, fiat money system. Back in 1901, the economy had not yet experienced the kind of rampant inflation that would come in the decades to follow. Inflation, the gradual increase in prices that erodes the purchasing power of money, wasn't as significant as it would become during the 20th century. A dollar in 1901 could buy quite a bit more than it can today. For instance, the average wage in 1901 was about $500 per year for a working-class person, which puts into perspective how much further money could go in those days. Things like food, housing, and transportation were all much cheaper than they are today. At the time, life was quite different from the modern world we know. The United States was still largely an agrarian society, though cities were beginning to grow rapidly. In 1901, there were no cars on the roads, and electricity was still a relatively new thing in many areas. Most people still lived in small towns or rural areas, and large-scale industries like steel, oil, and railroads were just beginning to dominate the economy. This was a time when the country was on the cusp of massive change, both in terms of its industrial base and its social fabric. The way people earned a living, the way they spent their money, and even the way they thought about value were all undergoing a profound transformation. But what about that $1 for 1901? What made it worth so much more today than it was worth back then? The answer to this question lies in the complex forces of inflation, economic policy, and global events that have unfolded over the last 120 years. Let's talk about inflation for a moment. Inflation is the process by which the prices of goods and services rise over time, while the value of money declines. In simple terms, as inflation increases, the dollar you have today buys you less tomorrow. Over time, this constant increase in prices chips away at the purchasing power of money. Inflation is something that has affected economies throughout history, but the 20th century saw a significant increase in the rate of inflation in many parts of the world, including the United States. In the early part of the 20th century, inflation was relatively mild. The U.S. economy was growing steadily, but the gold standard provided a measure of stability. However, as the century progressed, inflation began to accelerate. The two world wars, the Great Depression, and the economic policies implemented to respond to these crises all contributed to the erosion of the dollar's value. World War I, for example, had a profound effect on the global economy. The war required massive expenditures, and governments around the world began printing money to finance their war efforts. The U.S. was no exception. The Federal Reserve, established in 1913, began to manage the nation's money supply, but this didn't stop inflation from taking hold. By the time the war ended, the purchasing power of the dollar had already started to decline. The effects of inflation were further compounded by the Great Depression, which began in 1929. The stock market crash of that year wiped out billions of dollars in wealth, and the U.S. economy went into a prolonged period of economic turmoil. During the Depression, the government intervened in the economy in ways that hadn't been seen before, including the introduction of programs like Social Security, which further inflated the money supply. After World War II, inflation remained a persistent issue. The U.S. government, as well as other countries, continued to print money to support their post-war economies. The dollar was no longer tied to gold, and the government had the ability to increase the money supply whenever it saw fit. This led to a steady increase in inflation, with prices for everything from food to housing rising steadily over the decades. By the 1970s, inflation was running rampant. The U.S. experienced what is known as stagflation, a period of both high inflation and high unemployment. The value of the dollar continued to fall, and it became clear that the economic landscape of the United States had fundamentally changed. The once stable dollar, which had been worth far more in the early 20th century, had become a shadow of its former self, and that brings us to today. The dollar we use in 2023 is not the same as the dollar of 1901. The value of money has changed dramatically over the years. A dollar from 1901, when adjusted for inflation, is now worth a staggering $233 million. That's an astronomical increase, and it's the result of more than a century of inflation, economic upheavals, and changes in global markets. But it's not just inflation that has led to the dollar's transformation. The rarity of certain historical currencies, particularly coins, has played a significant role in the increase in value of money from past eras. Over time, coins from specific periods have become collectible, and their value has skyrocketed. A dollar from 1901, as part of this history, is now viewed as a rare and valuable item. This transformation from a regular piece of currency to a highly sought-after collectible is what makes the dollar from 1901 worth such a remarkable amount in today's market. Today, collectors and investors alike are fascinated by rare coins and currency from bygone eras. The dollar from 1901 has become a symbol of not just monetary value, but of historical significance. It represents a time of great change in the United States, when the country was on the verge of becoming a global power. The dollar itself has become more than just a piece of currency. It is a piece of American history, and it's worth far more today than it was in 1901. As we wrap up today's video, I hope you've gained a deeper understanding of how the value of money changes over time, and how a dollar from 1901 could come to be worth $233 million today. This story is a reminder that money is not just a tool for transactions. It's a living, evolving part of history. The value of currency, shaped by inflation, economic policy, and rare collectibles, can change in ways that we often don't expect. If you found today's video fascinating, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content about the amazing transformations in our world. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll see you in the next video. Last, 1895 coin. It's fantastic to have you with us again. Whether you're a returning viewer or tuning in for the first time, we're so glad you're here. If you've been following us for a while, you know that we love to dive deep into history, exploring the remarkable stories and events that have shaped our world. And today, we've got a story that is sure to surprise and perhaps even amaze you. A tale of money, inflation, and how the value of something as simple as a dollar can change over time. Today, we're going to talk about a dollar from 1895. Yes, you heard that right, 1895, and how that $1, adjusted for inflation, is worth a staggering $529 million today. It sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? A dollar that was worth relatively little in 1895 has grown to such an enormous value today. How did this happen? How does a single dollar from the past become worth such an immense fortune in today's terms? Well, buckle up, because today we're going to explore this fascinating phenomenon and the intricate world of inflation, economics, and rare currencies that have transformed the humble dollar into a symbol of incredible wealth. Let's start by taking a step back and setting the stage. The year is 1895. The United States, at the time, was in the midst of a period of significant growth and change. The country was rapidly industrializing, with factories sprouting up across the nation and the development of new technologies that were reshaping society. The late 1800s marked the tail end of the Gilded Age, a time of enormous economic expansion, but also one of stark inequality. The wealth gap was widening, and many Americans were facing difficult living conditions while the rich were becoming even wealthier. The economy of the United States was still heavily reliant on agriculture, though the rise of industry was changing that. Urbanization was accelerating, and people were flocking to cities in search of better job opportunities. Railroads were becoming more prevalent, connecting the nation in ways that had never been seen before. But life in 1895 wasn't just about progress. It was also about struggle. The country was facing economic instability, and the Panic of 1893 had left its mark on the American economy. Unemployment was high, and businesses were failing at alarming rates. Yet, amidst this economic turbulence, the dollar, despite being affected by the forces of inflation, still had significant purchasing power. To truly understand how a dollar from 1895 became worth $529 million today, we need to delve into the concept of inflation and how it impacts the value of money. Inflation refers to the general increase in prices and the decline in the purchasing power of money over time. In other words, inflation makes money worth less as time passes. When we talk about the dollar from 1895 being worth $529 million today, we're talking about the cumulative effect of more than a century of inflation. But the story doesn't stop there. Inflation alone doesn't explain how this specific dollar gained such immense value. In 1895, the U.S. was still on the gold standard, which meant that the value of the dollar was directly tied to a certain amount of gold. This system provided stability to the currency, but it also placed limits on the money supply. Back then, the economy was relatively stable in comparison to the chaotic times that would follow in the 20th century. The dollar was backed by gold reserves, and while inflation was a factor, the country wasn't printing money in the same way we see today. This meant that the value of the dollar was more reliable during this time, despite the challenges faced by the average American. $1 in 1895 could buy you a lot more than it could today. A dollar would have been enough to buy many everyday goods, like a loaf of bread, a gallon of milk, or a decent pair of shoes. It was still a time when the dollar had a substantial amount of purchasing power, but as the years rolled on, the economy would change drastically. As we look at the economic history that followed, we can start to see how inflation and other economic factors played a role in eroding the value of that dollar. The first major shift came with the dawn of the 20th century. The United States entered the 1900s with a growing economy and a booming industrial sector, but the value of money was beginning to shift. This change was most pronounced after World War I, a conflict that had a profound impact on the global economy. The U.S. had emerged from the war as a major economic powerhouse, but the financial costs of the war were significant. In response, the government printed more money, which increased the supply of currency in circulation, leading to inflation. The value of the dollar began to decrease as a result. After the war, the world experienced the Roaring '20s, a period of prosperity, but also one of excess. The U.S. economy was riding high, with stock markets soaring, but this period of wealth was ultimately followed by the Great Depression. The stock market crash of 1929 set off a chain reaction of economic devastation, and the value of money was once again put under tremendous pressure. The Great Depression marked a turning point in American economic history, and the effects would last for decades. The U.S. government, in an effort to stabilize the economy, implemented policies that led to the devaluation of the dollar, including the abandonment of the gold standard in 1933. This move would have long-lasting effects on the purchasing power of money, making the dollar worth significantly less than it had been just a few decades earlier. As the 20th century continued, inflation surged. The effects of the Great Depression were still being felt in the 1940s, but World War II brought the U.S. out of the economic slump. The post-war era was marked by rapid growth, as the U.S. became the dominant economic force in the world. However, this growth came at a cost. The government continued to print money to finance military and social programs, which led to even more inflation. By the 1970s, inflation was running rampant, and the value of the dollar had dropped drastically from what it had been in the 1890s. But it wasn't just inflation that made the dollar from 1895 worth so much today. Over the years, rare coins and currency from certain periods of history have become highly sought after by collectors. The $1,895 is part of this phenomenon. As the years passed, certain coins from the late 1800s and early 1900s gained a reputation for rarity, especially those that were minted during times of economic turbulence or significant events in American history. The dollar from 1895 became one of those rare, collectible items. The rise of numismatics, the study and collection of currency, played a huge role in the increasing value of rare coins. Coins from the 19th century, especially those from the 1890s, became highly coveted by collectors. There were several reasons for this. First, the number of these coins in circulation was limited, as many were lost or destroyed over the years. Second, the unique historical context of the time made these coins highly valuable. Collectors wanted items that represented a specific moment in time, and the $1,895 had a special place in American history. The rarity of the $1,895, combined with its historical significance, has made it one of the most sought-after items in the world of coin collecting. The value of the coin skyrocketed as demand increased among collectors and investors. Auctions for rare coins began to set records, with some coins fetching prices that seemed unimaginable. The $1,895, once an ordinary piece of currency, became a highly valuable artifact of American history, and its price continued to rise. When we talk about a dollar from 1895 being worth $529 million today, we're talking about a combination of factors: inflation, rarity, and historical significance. Inflation has inflated the value of money over time, but it is the rarity of the coin and its place in history that truly makes it worth such an astronomical amount. This dollar is not just a piece of currency. It's a symbol of how time, rarity, and historical events shape the value of money. As we move into the 21st century, we find that the story of the $1,895 is more than just a lesson in economics. It's a reminder of the ways in which our understanding of money and value has evolved over time. From the gold-backed dollar of the 19th century to the paper money of today, currency has undergone tremendous changes. The value of money is no longer tied to a specific amount of gold or silver, and governments can print money at will. Yet, even in this era of digital currencies and paper money, rare coins from the past continue to hold immense value. In many ways, the story of the $1,895 reflects the broader story of money itself. Money is more than just a tool for buying goods and services. It is a reflection of the societies that produce it. The value of money is shaped by political decisions, economic forces, and even cultural attitudes toward wealth and investment. The dollar from 1895, worth $529 million today, is a perfect example of how currency can change over time, influenced by forces both visible and invisible. As we wrap up today's video, I hope this story has given you a new perspective on the value of money and the fascinating journey it takes over time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more exciting content about history, economics, and everything in between. Thank you for joining us today, and as always, stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.